Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello listeners, this is your host Anjana and you're listening to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast on the theme Digital Economy. Recently, telecom operators Vodafone Idea, Reliance Jio and Bharti Airtel have increased their tariffs after the 10th spectrum auction. Starting with Jio, this telecom operator announced a 12 to 27% increase in their mobile tariffs. Later, Bharti Airtel increased their tariffs by 10 to 21%. Following the trend, Vodafone Idea also surged their tariffs. How will this impact the digital economy of our country? What are the consequences and merits? Let's discuss all about it in this episode. To talk about it, we have with us Dr. V.Sridhar, Professor at the Center for IT and Public Policy at the International Institute of Information Technology, Bengaluru. He is the author of 3 books, The Telecom Revolution in India, Technology, Regulation and Policy, The Dynamics of Spectrum Management, Legacy, Technology and Economics, and Emerging ICT Policies and Regulation Roadmap to Digital Economies. He has been a member of Government of India Committees on Telecom and Information Technology. Let's get started. Welcome Sridhar to the podcast. Industry watchers are concerned that internet and digital accessibility are not equally distributed in our country. So when such an increase in tariffs happen across different telecom operators, do you think that this could lead to an increase in the divide in case of accessibility?
So, Anjana, as you have correctly pointed out, the 3 private telcos in the country, Bharti Airtel, Reliance Jio and Vodafone Idea, have announced a tariff hike of about 10% to 25% for mobile broadband services in the country. Now, this, as the Department of Telecommunications has also clarified, comes under the market forbearance rule, right? As specified by the regulatory authority, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. So, the TRAI does not have the provision to put ceiling or any other regulatory intervention to the tariff. Now, the question is, will this affect mobile broadband penetration, as you have correctly pointed out, in the country? Now, if you look at the recent telecom performance report, which is published by TRAI, every quarter they publish the telecom performance report. Our rural broadband adoption is around 44%. Rural broadband density is about 44%. Compared to 111% in the urban areas. It is understood that in the urban areas, people will have dual SIMs and so on, and therefore it is more than 100%. Now, there are, the rural broadband has not achieved the desired level of, say, probably close to 100 or even 70% or 80%. It is still at 44%. So it is still low. Now, when you look at any consumer, there are 2 costs which are faced by the consumer for getting the mobile broadband connection. One is the cost of the smartphone, and the second was the cost of broadband subscription. So there are 2 costs that the consumer always has in mind before purchasing a mobile broadband connection. Now, if you look at the World Mobile Pricing Report, which has recently been published by cable.co.uk, the price per GB of data plan in India is about 16 cents. $0.16 compared to about $6 in the US. Right? So even accounting for purchasing power parity, the data plan in India is much, much cheaper than any other country in the world. There are very 100%. Few countries above India that has lower tariffs. Right?
Correct.
Now, but so broadband subscription has always been very low in our country, thanks to competition and other factors. Same cannot be said about the mobile handset prices. Mobile handset prices depend upon required features and so on. Of course, we have made some inroads in building indigenous, at least assembling indigenous handsets to reduce the price of the handsets. But there can be variations. In my view, this marginal increase, even though it is 10% to 25% of the very low tariffs that we have been witnessing, will not have any material impact on the adoption of mobile broadband in the rural areas of the country, and it will not materially affect the divide.
Okay. That brings in a lot of perspective. Just very curious here. What are the implications of these increased tariffs on digital economy's contribution to our overall economic growth?
See, as per the recent study on the Indian digital economy, which has been published by IIIT, Indian economy ranks third, next only to the US and China in terms of the most digitalized countries in the world. So if you look at the digital economy in terms of value, India ranks third. Right?
Yes.
Now, in terms of connectivity parameters that drive the digital economy, India ranks second. In fact, it is even ahead of the US, next only to China. So there are various, clear study, if you look at it, it compares a lot of factors in coming up with this particular ranking process for the digital economy. One of the parameters is, of course, connectivity. And connectivity, we rank quite high, right? So any disruption in the connectivity is not likely to have material impact on the digital economy. That is point number one. Right. Now, the second is, having said that, we need to see whether this increase in tariffs will slow down the digital economy, right? Will it have, some effect at all? There are three factors, as we discussed before: access, quality, and affordability define how users use mobile broadband connectivity for their digital requirements. So affordability, yes, it is price. But it is not just the price, right? You have to look at accessibility and also quality of service. These are also important. Now, having said that, we need to improve the rural access to broadband services from the existing 44%. So, which means that we need to have telcos, both the private and the public telcos, to roll out 4G and 5G services in the rural parts of the country. There have been some interventions by the government. For example, the BharatNet project has been rolled out, and this provides the required backhaul, right? A very high quality backhaul for mobile connectivity. Then India has also launched vigorously the Wireless Access Network Interface, or Prime Minister's WANI project. This is for providing Wi-Fi access, public Wi-Fi access in the basically rural and remote parts of the country. So these two projects together will increase the accessibility part of it. Right? So one is the price, about which we have discussed. The second one is access. So access, a lot of these two projects, mainly the backhaul project and the Wi-Fi project, are expected to increase, for example, the accessibility. Now, the third one is quality. Right? Now, today I read that in a recent report, 89% of the users who surveyed said that they have been having call dropouts. They have to resort to, for example, OTT platforms such as WhatsApp in order to complete the calls.
Correct.
Now, that is very, very alarming, right? So the telcos, have to increase the capacity of the backhaul connections. For example, if you look today, lot of cell to cell, if you have two cells, and the interconnectivity between the cells are normally through microwave. In India, are close to 50 to 60% or microwave that have to be converted into fiber. Because if you are talking about 4G, 5G, the handset is capable of transmitting in gigabits, but if the backhaul is not proper, then you will not get the required quality of service experience. Right?
Correct.
So this is one thing. The quality has to be improved by improving the infrastructure, and that is in the hands of the telcos. Right? Of course, the government has provided the requisite infrastructure, especially in the rural and remote areas, through the BharatNet project and the WANI project, but it is up to the telcos to invest and improve the quality of service. So by improving all the three factors, we can hope to bridge the digital divide. Right. So the current quality of mobile broadband connectivity is poor. It is not only in rural areas, but also in urban areas. We are not getting the required connectivity speed, downlink and uplink speed, both for 4G and 5G. And that has to be, improved by the telcos.
Recently, I was going through the World Economic Forum Digital Infrastructure Report. And one of the main ways to enhance global digital economy, as per the report, is by increasing the mobile spectrum. Given this, do you think the decision to raise tariffs could lead to an increase in the mobile spectrum coverage within the country?
Okay, so let me answer this question. So what is the spectrum? The radio spectrum for commercial mobile services is a very scarce resource.
Correct.
And without this radio spectrum, the telcos cannot operate mobile services. It is very, very important to have that ingredient. Right?
Correct.
Now, we have been auctioning the radio spectrum since 2010. using a
100%.
very well-known simultaneous multiple round auction procedure, right? So it has been proven to be the best method in order to auction radio spectrum. But the problem is that one of the configuration parameters for this auction is what is called as the reserve price, right? So the reserve price is the starting bid price in any auction for a particular band of spectrum in a particular licensed service areas. India has about 22 licensed service areas, and there are different reserve prices for different kinds of spectrum. Now, in order to cover the rural areas of the country, it is very, very important for the telcos to acquire something called as a sub-gigahertz spectrum. Sub-gigahertz means below 1 gigahertz, which is 600 megahertz, 700 megahertz, 800 megahertz, and 900 megahertz. Right? Because this spectrum, the sub-gigahertz spectrum, has excellent propagation characteristics. It is ideally suited for rural and remote parts of the country. Right? Now, when the telcos go into the auction for acquiring this spectrum, the price has to be affordable by them. Right? So, if the starting price, the reserve price of these spectrum bands are very high, the telcos do not have any incentive to acquire the spectrum. So they get less and less of the spectrum. And if they get less of the spectrum, of course, they cannot provide rural and remote parts a good connectivity. Right? So this has been a vicious circle. We have argued many times that the reserve price, especially for the sub-gigahertz spectrum, has to be revisited by the regulator as well as the government. So in other words, what is happening is that, let me tell you one thing. This 700 megahertz has been put into auction in the last 3-4 auctions. But only in the last auction, and that too, just 10 megahertz was picked up. It has remained not used for a very long time. Now, this is like, it cannot be stored. Spectrum cannot be stored. If you don't use it in this particular minute, it is gone. The capacity is wasted. So we have been, underusing this spectrum, this golden spectrum, which is required for providing rural connectivity for a very long time. The 600 megahertz spectrum, which was put into auction last year, nobody picked it up. The main reason being that the reserve prices are very high, and therefore the telcos have a lot of hesitance in acquiring the spectrum at very high prices, right? Especially when they don't know how much of revenue they will get from the rural and remote parts of the country.
Correct.
Right? So, if the price of the spectrum goes higher, then of course it is an investment by the telcos, and therefore they would like to apportion part of this investment as increased tariffs. And that is one of the reasons why, for example, the spectrum prices in India in general are very high. For example, to give you some numbers, the 700 megahertz reserve price runs around, on the average, $0.25, taking into account the purchasing power parity. In the urban areas, it can be double that, which is much, much higher than the international average for this kind of spectrum. So with these high reserve prices and high bid prices for the spectrum, the telcos are starved of this particular spectrum for providing rural connectivity. Even if they buy it, they have to pass on the cost to the consumers in terms of increased tariffs.
Okay. Now, coming to a very important question here is, we all know that social media is an important part of our lives in today's world. So how will it affect social media behavioral pattern and the business of various mobile apps, such as video sharing platforms like Instagram, and how will it impact the businesses?
Yeah. See, as pointed out earlier, if there is an increase in tariff, of course, consumers are normally have a high elasticity towards price, and therefore they would reduce the consumption, right? They would reduce the data consumption to some extent. But in the case of social media behavior is very different, right? There's a lot of network effects, and it is very addictive. So this will counterbalance. So I don't see any marked decrease in the social media behavior because of the increase in tariffs. I don't believe that the consumption of the social media will come down drastically, but consumers will spend more of their disposable income on internet and broadband connectivity, right? So instead of spending, on the average, the average revenue per user in India is one of the lowest. It's about 200 rupees per month, right? It's very, very low. And it might go up a little bit. People will have to spend more on consumption. And this will also force the consumers to think what content is important for them to consume and provide a rational behavior in terms of content consumption.
Okay. Today in our world, we use UPI and we have cashless transaction, which takes place over internet, and we use internet for all such purposes. So, do you think that these kind of transactions could be affected because of this tariffs? Also, when it comes to small and medium-sized enterprises that are heavily dependent on digital platforms, do you think that these higher tariffs could impact their businesses as well?
Okay, so first I will address the later part of the question about SMEs, right? The small and medium enterprises. So definitely the SMEs will have a limited budget for internet and broadband connectivity, and therefore increased tariffs will definitely affect them because of the higher elasticity of demand. But there are alternate solutions, right? The solution is something called as captive non-public network. Is a network which the enterprise can have on its premise for communication within the campuses, right? So, for example, if it is a small manufacturing facility, they can construct a CNPN, right? And they can have all the high bandwidth communication within the particular campus at a reasonable price, right? So CNPN. So these CNP, these are not public network; these are captive non-public network, which are present in the enterprise for the enterprise use. You understand what I'm saying? So this is for enterprise use. Now, these can be put in by telcos, for example. Telcos have a great opportunity for them to actually construct enterprise-wide networks for them to have a good connectivity at reasonable, affordable prices. India, it has not yet picked up. The reason is that India has to, our government and the regulator has not formed yet a policy on how to allocate this radio spectrum, which is required for constructing the CNPNs. So it is ambiguous. So, for example, whether it will be auctioned, whether it will be administratively assigned, the decision has not yet been made. Whether only telcos will get that spectrum to provide the enterprise-wide connectivity or non-telcos, even building, for example, all these brigade constructions and, large construction who have this SEZs, who have their buildings in the special economic zones, can also put in this particular infrastructure for enterprise use. So the policy is very ambiguous. It has not yet been stated. And therefore, the telcos are not investing much of their time there. Their business enterprises, right? So these are alternatives, right? I mean, the business users are definitely different from a retail user like you and me. So they have different requirements, and these can be met at affordable prices using the captive non-public networks. This has to be, addressed both by the regulator as well as the telcos in order to decrease the deployment cost for SMEs. So that is about that SMEs, right? Now, the other question that you have indicated, UPI and others usage. This internet, it can be visualized as something called as a two-sided market, right? And the telcos provide the connectivity. On one side are consumers, the other sides are content and application providers. Right? So, for example, when we watch a Netflix movie, I am the consumer on one side. I use the telco's broadband connection in order to connect to Netflix, and Netflix provides me with a movie or a pay-per-view demand, right? Now, in the case of a two-sided market, in this particular case, right? So consumers pay for the bandwidth, right? So whenever they download a movie or whenever they stream a movie, they pay for the bandwidth charges.
100%.
Now, the Netflix or the content and application providers do not pay. Right? This is known as subsidy side. They don't pay. So if, for example, tomorrow telco finds out that their broadband connectivity needs more infrastructure, more capacity, and they have to invest, they have no option but to increase the tariff for the consumer. That's what they have been doing, right? The 10% to 25%. It's not I mean, I can't really see that they are motivated them to increase their profit margin, because their already profit margin is relatively good. We'll talk about it later on. But they have to reinvest. They have to invest in infrastructure in order to improve the quality of service. And therefore, tariff increase is one of the options for the telcos.
Okay.
Now, the other option is for the telcos to request these Netflix or Amazon Prime. I mean, I'm not talking about a small gaming firm that provides gaming services. I'm talking about large traffic generators. Today, if you look at Netflix or Amazon Prime, they, I mean, just to give you some data here, Netflix is responsible for 15% of the global internet traffic. Oh. Every day, people watch around 1 billion hours of video on YouTube, right? And Amazon Prime Video has more than 200 million subscribers worldwide. So these are large numbers. These are called as large traffic generators, or LTGs. Right? Now, these LTGs consume a lot of bandwidth, and therefore, it is, in my view, in fact, we have written a report also along with Professor Rohit Prasad at Management Development Institute in Gurgaon, that these content and application providers, large traffic generators, also should pay, right, a levy of some kind to the telcos for improving the infrastructure. Now, this will reduce the burden of the telcos to increase the tariff, and therefore the tariff for the consumer, retail consumer like you and me, will come down a little bit, right? Okay. And therefore, this is one of the ways. These are one of the ways to address, for example, the consumer's pain point on increased tariffs.
Okay. Understood. So, one of my, worries, or one of my, questions that I have to put out here is, what measures can be taken to protect consumers from the negative impacts of increased tariffs? And are there any policies in place to mitigate these effects?
Yeah. So I list about 2 or 3, right? So the first one is the to make affordable enterprise services. The regulator and the government has to come out with clear rules on who can provide the captive non-public networks, and also allocation of spectrum for that. Okay. The second one, which is also, as we have mentioned, is some kind of an infrastructure levy for large traffic generators, such as Amazon Prime, Netflix, so on. Right? So we need to define the threshold of what a large traffic generator is. If the content and application provider falls into this category, one way is to tax them, because as of now, the telcos pay a lot of regulatory levies, as you know, right? License fees, spectrum charges, and so on. Universal service levy, all these are paid by the telcos. And consumers also pay tax, right? Service tax, and so on. But the large traffic generators, such as Amazon Prime or Netflix or any of these companies, if they pay a levy called infrastructure levy, which we can go to the telcos to improve the infrastructure, then the burden on the consumers will reduce. In fact, a lot of countries, and this is called as fair share principle, and it is being looked at very actively, both in the European Union as well as in some countries where the content and application volume is very high, such as South Korea. So this is one of the regulatory interventions which can possibly reduce the consumer burden on prices, increase prices. Okay. The third one is provide affordable internet access through Wi-Fi. Right? So the wireless, Wi-Fi, all of us have at home or in the offices, provide affordable internet connectivity. This is this is a substitute for mobile broadband access. So if you don't have broadband access, you have broadband access. It is an affordable substitute for mobile broadband access. And we have done some inroads. For example, I mentioned earlier about the Vani, the PM Vani program. So even as we speak, BSNL has been launching a lot of programs using this public Wi-Fi. The only thing is the public Wi-Fi has been envisioned as local entrepreneur, providing Wi-Fi access to the community. So there has to be some kind of a method to make it financially sustainable. But this is one of the areas in which government can relook at providing public Wi-Fi as an alternative to mobile broadband in order to provide affordable broadband connectivity to retail customers.
Do you think that there is a significant role that government can play in this for regulating tariff by network operators?
See, regulating tariff. See, as I have mentioned before, we are in a market forbearance.
Correct.
Right? So market forbearance does not necessarily warrant a regulatory intervention with respect to tariff. Right? So because it is up to the market to decide what the price is going to be. So, and we don't want to change that, because if we change that, then the regulator will issue cap and pricing now and then it may not be reflective of the reality, and therefore we don't want micro details such as this to be regulated, right? So so that's why we have moved into market forbearance, right? Regulator has realized that it is not possible to prescribe certain ceiling prices for mobile broadband, and therefore we have moved to market forbearance. So in the case, so we won't have any method to regulate tariff, but we can have some other policy interventions, as I have mentioned before, to improve Wi-Fi connectivity, to include a special levy for large traffic generators, or something along these lines in order to reduce the tariff burden on the consumers.
Can these increased tariffs affect India's competitiveness in the global digital economy space? What do you think?
The tariff hikes will be welcomed by everyone. I mean, the reason is that tariffs in India, as I have pointed out before, at $0.16 is one of the lowest in the world. The average revenue per user at this time is about 200 rupees. Right, is one of the lowest in the world. So which means that, telcos are, of course, the numbers, this is the average revenue per user. You have to multiply it by the number of users. Number of users are, of course, huge in India and in billion, right? And therefore, the telcos can make up, right? It is not that telcos are in a pretty bad shape, except for Vodafone Idea. Both the Reliance Jio as well as Bharti, Airtel have been having a good profit margin. Their EBITDA margin is close to 50%. Net profit margin is around 6%. And therefore, they are in a good position. But the investment to sales ratio of even the larger telcos have been falling. So which means that even though their revenue is picking up, the investment into the infrastructure out of this revenue has been falling. Right? So the telcos have to increase this investment in infrastructure, as we have mentioned before, to improve the quality of service. Right? That's one of the biggest concern in the mobile broadband connectivity space today.
Right.
But in order for them to invest, right, they need investment, right? And therefore, this signal of increased tariffs, right, will indicate that the telcos want to improve their profitability. At the same time, improve the investment to sales ratio. And therefore, this will send, in my view, positive signal to the investors, right? Especially those who want to put in their, FDI into India's telcos. FDI in telcos, in Indian telcos, have been falling rapidly over the last 5 to 6 years, right? Because of the drop in prices and the drop in ARPU. So any increase in the ARPU or, for example, the tariff will be welcome by global investors.
Correct. Interesting. So what is your one last note that you would like to give to our listeners today?
So increased tariffs, we definitely it will affect the retail customers like you and me. But the most important thing in mobile broadband is the quality of experience and quality of service. So even if we pay a little bit higher, we need to have coverage. We need to have zero call drops. Right? We need to have the guaranteed downlink and uplink speed. This is what, as consumers, we should negotiate and dictate from the telcos. You have increased the tariffs, no problem, I will pay. But at the same time, I have to get the guaranteed quality of service that you promised me. Right? And that is one thing that I want all the consumers to raise, right? Not only the telcos, but also to the regulators whenever they have coverage issues. There are apps such as, which has been released by TRAI on their website. So there is sometimes called as My Speed app. So they can actually check the speed of the connection. If the speed of the connection is very low, right, they can raise the complaint. They should do that, right? Then the regulator will have a lot of data points in order to, sort of ask the telcos to improve. Every quarter, TRAI releases quality of service parameters, and we continue to have very poor coverage and very poor call quality in certain locations of the country. So this is the final word from me. Increase in tariffs, okay, not a problem, but we have to get commensurate, improved quality of service from the telcos.
Thank you so much, Sridhar, for joining with us today. It was a pleasure to have you with us. I'm sure our listeners would have gained a lot of insights from this conversation. We'll be back with yet another episode of the State of the Economy podcast on the theme Digital Economy. Till then, listeners, you take care. We'll be back very soon. This is your host, Anjana, signing off.